Hello everyone, greetings from the 7th of Nero, AJ here, and this is a companion introduction to the last video about the Iron Kingdoms. Herein I'll cover the rest of Immoren and those peoples not part of a discrete nation state. And while some information will be offered, I am aware that I may likely generate more questions than I answer, questions which will be topics for future discussions. Essentially, this will be basically dancing around the Horde's factions because before the release of the limited factions, most factions that didn't have an established state within set borders were part of the Horde's system. Nonetheless, of those playable factions, we have a semi-nomadic race of boisterous blue drunkards, a rough gathering of flesh-eating nihilists, a megalomaniac's minions, even though this could apply to quite a few different factions or sub-factions. But okay, moving on. We also have a BDSM empire of elephant drivers, Menoth's worst headache, and a couple of rough alliances comprising swamp-tilling crocs and self-aggrandizing murder pigs with delusions of grandeur. Oh, and infernals. But we won't talk about that here, not least because they're generally characterized as War Machine. In any event, it's quite a smorgasbord of quirkiness, huh? Even though War Machine predates Hordes by a few years, the factions were developed thoroughly enough to have as much a storied history as those of Horde's sibling game system, and they slotted themselves into the game world with ease and a great deal of character. Those groups with aspirations, actual or perceived, to domination in Immoren seem like a disparate lot, as that previous list of vague descriptions would suggest, but they are, perhaps unsurprisingly, in reality a much more disparate collection than even that in almost every respect. But like the eponymous Iron Kingdoms, they do have a very small number of common features. Instead of the Warcaster gift, though, they manifest the Warlock's gift, which is moulded in different ways depending on overriding traditions of successful methods, allowing them to control wild beasts to fight for them. The zealots from the Protectorate would have you believe that Menoth gave mankind the gifts needed to survive either against or alongside these same wild beasts and civilize the lands, sending his greatest enemy, the Serpent, otherwise known as the Devourer Worm, fleeing for the darkest recesses of Urkane. And that there the worm has been biding its time, nurturing its creations in those swamps, mountains, and forests that not even the hardiest of men contemplate settling in. The creatures that dwell in these places, hidden from human eyes, are a barbarous lot to those of urbane standing. They beckon to them the most feral of beasts to be found close by, not understanding or not looking on with any favour the conventions of war using warjacks, adhering to their own tried and tested ways of doing battle. Theirs is seen as an earthy, unrefined, and barbaric magic, riling the beasts of war bound to them and their magic, harnessing the bestial fury generated by acts of pain, madness, and violence, moulding it as they see fit and using it with similar attitude. Many would consider this process a gross mockery of the cultured magic used in the West. Indeed, scholars of the civilized world believe it a precursor of necromancy, in their eyes a justified judgment, for a warlock's connection to their charges can continue long after a beast falls in battle. The war beasts themselves are nothing but slaves to those that hold their mental leash, deprived of any independence of thought or action except what their warlock commands, made more pitiful for their sentience. But then it may as well not be any greater than a warjack's. No matter what they may show you in affection between creature and master, whatever freedom the beast may display, be in no doubt theirs is a relationship of slave and master, weapon and wielder, tool and craftsman, if their craft be brutality incarnate. A warlock has no need for a beast it cannot control, and while its loss may be mourned, it is rarely counted as particularly grievous loss on any occasion. Warlocks themselves are the commodity of their superior's value, knowing that their loss would surely be counted as grievous. But for all that they may be valued as a resource of strength and power to be leveraged in battle and war, a warlock's overlords and colleagues do not need to like them necessarily, for many warlocks are as savage as the beasts they command. But then, the masters of warlocks come in all stripes and levels of sanity. Sanity notwithstanding, for many of these factions to have survived this long and remained a threat within and to the Iron Kingdoms, state of mind rarely precludes one from advancement if sufficient aptitude is demonstrated and results are forthcoming. Among the better, if more rational, examples of this egalitarianism are the troll-blood trollkin, whose creels are led in war by whoever is seen as fittest to do so, usually the creel's foremost champion, while alliances revolve around the greatest of their leaders, who attain such positions through wisdom and knowledge in warcraft and charisma equally. Semi-nomadic folk, but often not by choice, the Cholkin are a scattered people, and though most creoles are found throughout Cygnar, they nonetheless span much of the Iron Kingdoms, settling in desolate and mountainous areas that humans would be unable to reside in, if only because they have been forced from their old homes. Their desire to simply have a place to live has brought them into conflict against neighbours who often fear and despise them, sometimes out of plain ignorance. And yet many retain their humour, and despite their lot in life, take delight in those three most trollish of pastimes: fornicating, drinking, and brawling. Which is the most important depends on who you ask, as is which one you should partake in first in any given evening. Both male and female trolls consider them equally worthy and equally morally upright endeavours. Consequently, it should be no surprise that this most rustic of races offer their prayers to Dunia, the Great Mother, who would have her children live and let live. For the most part, trolls truly do wish to do so, but transgressions against them from all sides are forced their hand, and they'll gladly give their enemies a taste of what it means to pick a fight with a troll. A lot less tolerant of such delusions of prosperity and the ways of Dunya are the forest-dwelling followers of the devourer worm, who has many epithets besides, as befits a primordial deity. In terms of outlook, the black clouds of the Circle Orboros and the chieftains of the Cholkin creoles could not be more different. When the chieftains look to their creoles, the blackclads seek to keep their secrets closer, including from their underlings. Perhaps the most primal of Immoren's competing factions, a great many of Circle Orboros's adherents delight in brutality amidst battle that would bewilder their enemies if it did not horrify them. The servants of the Great Serpent dwell and plan from the forests where the civilized peoples of Immoren do not set foot for fear of what can be found. One such resident, Wormwood, is anything but a harmless tree, and is never merciful to unexpected guests, gladly soaking up fresh spilled blood into its roots, while the omnipotence and potence that govern the Circle Orboros's territorial dominions are of much similar attitude. Perhaps less terrifying, or perhaps not, but no less deadly, the Druids and Blackclads call to their side the forest's fiercest beasts to fight for them. Some are natural residents, but others not so much, while there are yet those for which one would hesitate to use reside to describe what they do or what they are. Bound by magic, the Blackclads claim their own. The Wolds bring a different way of waging war, constructs that easily challenge warjacks, driven by a variant of the bestial fury that courses through the bodies of satyrs, griffins, and warp wolves, amongst others. This last sort, the warp wolves, it is well that most common folk do not realize what they really are and what they used to be. That they become what they are, and willingly, in full knowledge of what they sacrifice, would surely be greeted with yet more horror by those they fight and invariably kill. Bringing a different horror to the battlefield are the minions of the scheming dragon Everblight. His legion is a relative newcomer to the warscape of Immoren, making their presence known only in 605 AR. Yet they have wrought such chaos, upsetting the plans of all they have encountered. Though it has been centuries since he has taken flight or assumed his draconic form, Everblight took an active part in the expansion of his legions, coercing, seducing, or blighting the northern Ogren and Nis to his service, refining methods he had developed for thousands of years. For the legion of Everblight serve his ends as no other before it. However, unlike those he must compete with, and unlike those he wishes to usurp, the beasts his warlock underlings command are no natural creatures, born from a cycle of life and death. No, these dragon spawn manifest from the warlock's blight-blessed blood, and are moulded into their full-grown forms and purposes by the will of the warlock whose blood gives them life. With a continuous supply of flesh, whether incidentally hunted or from the detritus of recent battle, a dragon spawn can grow from a drop of blood to matured and battle-ready war beast in a matter of but a few hours. Such power as wielded by the Legion, and in so little time, is terrifying indeed. And now that Everblight has so greatly increased his strength by absorbing the earth anchor of one of his brother dragons, who knows where his ambition will take him? A similar ambition also drives all within the Scorn Empire. Perhaps the only civilized nation in the East, even if their Western counterparts would argue vehemently at such a notion of civility. The Scorn are the only power where they reside, east of the Bloodstone Desert, having subjugated all others there, bending the tribes of the Cyclopes to their will, enslaving them to their bestiaries, along with the obviously more feral Titans, Aradi, and other beasts of the Empire. And unlike any other power on Immoren, the Scorn do not believe in any god or divine being, instead paying obeisance to the spirits of the greatest of their ancestors and strict adherence to their warrior code within a society that values the prowess of the individual over all but the strength and unity of the empire, even if it means killing a few petty rivals to demonstrate both. Philosophies relating to honor, sacrifice, and morality are what bind what would otherwise be a disjointed realm. Instead, they give rise to a supreme caste of warrior philosophers steeped in the ways of Hokusune, the tenets of which explain the Scorn predilection towards a more intimate form of combat and austere way of life. Though the Scorn realm is an empire, they have no emperor or empress, being nominally led by the governors of the military districts, otherwise known as Tors, and do not consider themselves united, as each house and their tyrant conducts its own affairs, largely independent of the governors and each other. But despite being deeply traditional in denying such power, Makeda, Archdomina of House Balash, is recognized as the Scorn leader as instanced by her appellation of Supreme Archdomina. Makeda, though, does embody everything of value to a Scorn's character and does not rest on her laurels, personally leading the great host that crossed the Bloodstone Desert to present the Iron Kingdoms with yet another contender to supremacy. In and amongst this incongruous collection lie those groups who would fight for others as much as themselves. One would be just as likely to find them fighting amongst each other as any potential combination of belligerents. Here at the fringes of society and amidst the wilderness, though, are those few intrepid enough to deal directly with the trolls, blackclads, blighted, and scorn, if they have either enough reputation, notoriety, or courage. And they stand, fortunately or regrettably, astride some with pretensions to a greater destiny, but whether they are capable of achieving it is a different matter entirely. However, the gateman and the pharaoh, these minions to whichever master they choose to serve, have occupied their scraps of mud and dirt for centuries, fighting for what seems like the entire time. So one must consider it a wonder that Western Immoren has not yet descended into complete anarchy. And among their ranks count some of the more uncontrollable beasts, brought to heel simply by swamp magic and the promise of a free meal, gourmet that they do not normally feast on, while others are results of one grotesque biological experiment or another. Yet those of Blindwater and Thornfall have not made much by way of permanent gains, though it would be within their power to if given the direction to conquer. Nor have they been wholly or even partially defeated and eradicated, as could be if greater powers had any inclination to invade their swamps and badlands. And so they persist and plan their plans and fight their fights, petty though they may seem to outside eyes. Whether there is a method to their apparent madness is something few can really answer. Anathema to almost everything these disparate factions fight for is an almost unknowable group known as the Defiers, whom Menoth thought imprisoned, but now freed by the machinations of the old witch. Rebels against the Creator for not bowing to his demand to be enslaved and chained to his vision of fire, wall, sheaf, and law, the Defiers were convicted as heretics in Menoth's name and cast into the depths of Arcane to suffer for eternity. But their defiance would be remembered, first in reverence, but soon warped by the lawgivers devout into fairy stories told to keep their followers on the straight and narrow, told by parents to keep their children well behaved. Their sojourn in Arcane and encounters with souls damned by the gods, in whom such mortal favours had the wrong effect, all but confirmed the Defiers' convictions that Menoth was not the god deserved by humanity. They reversed the judgments against these lost souls, and from these acts were the Grimkin born and created. Discarded spirits saved by the Defiers, who readily helped them plan their return to Cain and their awaiting vengeance, to commence the wicked harvest. But the harvest may not be such a good thing, if anyone might deem it a good thing, for while the Defiers reaped what Menoth sowed amongst humanity, Infernals observe and are dismayed that a debt owed to them is being collected by others, and that cannot stand. They have business with mankind, and nothing will stop them from completing the contract. And so, as must be asked, sooner or later, pitiful soul, to whom would you prefer to surrender yourself?